Well, our next guest grew up in India with her mother, who was a single parent. She says her mother always told her, "I want you to be successful." Well, I think it's safe to say that she accomplished that goal because she's now an award-winning, best-selling author.
That's right. Her new book, Before We Visit the Goddess, was inspired by her years growing up in India and what successful really meant. Author Chitra Banerjee, sorry, I don't know, how do you say the middle
Banerjee.
Banerjee. Oh, we just changed all this. Sorry. Divakaruni, right?
That's right.
There we go. Joins us on the yellow couch. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure, absolutely.
Absolutely. So nice to have you here. Let's talk a little bit about your writing styles, because throughout the years, you've done all these different kinds of writings, from poetry to the style of this book as well. What's kind of brought you to where you are now as an author?
Well, I've always liked experimenting with different things. So I started with poetry, moved on to short stories, and now I write mostly novels. And Before We Visit the Goddess is actually a nice mix. It's what's called a novel in stories. So there are 9 stories, but together they make up the 3 generations of this woman's life.
How do you think being raised by a single mom, especially in India, where it was very difficult for her to raise you as a single parent, how do you think that affects you, your life, as well as your writing?
Well, one of the things my mother always said to me is, "I want you to grow up to be a successful woman." So that was kind of like a mantra in the back of my head. And I had to ask myself, what does that really mean? And as I was growing up, that was a question I asked myself. So the 3 generations of women have to answer that question differently, because depending on where you grow up and the time period in which you grow up, success might mean something very different for a woman.
Well, and talk a little bit about that, because you have 3 generations in your book. It's Shabitri is one of the main characters, her daughter Bella, and then her daughter Tara, right?
Right.
How does success change for those 3 women throughout the book?
Well, when Shabitri is growing up, which is during my mother's generation in India, when India is newly independent, education for women was not as common, especially if you came from a poor family as Shabitri did. So she had to struggle very hard for her education. She had a lot of talent, but it took a long time for her to really be able to make use of that talent. But she does. She's going to open a sweet shop, and it's going to become very successful. So she's kind of an entrepreneur who has to really struggle through a lot of what society didn't think was okay for women to do at that time.
A little pioneer-esque.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
she was very pioneer-esque. Yes. And Bella comes to the United States, so her struggles are different because she comes as an immigrant. She has to get used to everything here in the United States, and life is very different. She has to start from scratch as an immigrant, and she has to negotiate those things. And the family structure is different. There isn't that extended family that'll help you. So, you know, she is pioneer-esque in that way.
Yes.
And she is going to actually open a food blog that becomes very popular.
Love
so
that.
she takes that theme of food, but she's changing it according to her time and her place.
What about the theme in your book where one of your main characters makes a mistake, a choice, that sort of, there are ramifications of that choice for future generations? Why was that theme something that you liked, that concept that somebody could make a choice that would be sort of unforgivable in some people's eyes?
Yeah, well, I've been thinking about this book ever since my mother passed away several years back. And one of the big themes in this book then is heritage. What do we get from our previous generations? What do we pass on to our children? And while we hope that these things are all good, and Before We Visit the Goddess, we see that often we pass on to children things that are not necessarily positive. They're our fears, they're our distrust of people. We have all kinds of experiences that we internalize, but then we pass them on to our children when they're young. And so one of these concepts is that you make a mistake, you have to pay for it. And because they are coming from that belief, that changes how they look at life.
Yeah. I love all these themes. You know, you talk about the relationship between mothers and daughters, your family, whether it's blood or chosen. And that's a big theme in yours as well, the fact that you're leaving that blood family and you're choosing a new life or a new family in a new country.
Yes, that's very important in Before We Visit the Goddess. And in fact, the 3 women are very close to each other in many ways, but as happens when mothers and daughters are close and they're very strong characters, there's a lot of,
Butting of heads.
butting of heads. And sometimes you have to go away from that blood family in order to grow.
Yeah.
And all of these women discover that sometimes their best help comes from a chosen family, not the blood family.
I like that. The friends that we choose, right? It's
Yes.
wonderful to meet you. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your wonderful book with us. If people want to find out more, because I know your book signing was last night, it was very successful. It was great to have you here in town. People can visit your website and find out more about Before We Visit the Goddess by going to Chitra Divakaruni.com, and for the spelling, you can look at it right there on our screen. Thank you so much.
Thanks for
Thank
joining us.
you.
Appreciate it.